Horror games have always been a popular genre, but it seems now more than ever they've moved to the forefront of the industry. Mascot horrors like FNAF, Poppy's Playtime, and several hundred other indie games fighting for their place in the spotlight have exploded since the mid to late 2010s and show no signs of stopping. In fact, at the time of finalizing this script, Secret of the Mimic has just been released, and it seems that every big YouTuber is covering the game. But mascot horror isn't the only subgenre taking over. Indie horror games of all kind are becoming popular, especially the nostalgia-fueled retro-style horror games like Iron Lung, No One Lives Under the Lighthouse, Squirrel Stapler, and countless others. Itch.io is now a hub for really fun, short-form horror experiences in this retro style, and it almost feels like horror game fans have entered into a renaissance period with these games. But while a lot of attention has gone to some of these shorter quote-unquote bite-sized horror experiences, and rightfully so, I think that longer, more fleshed out games have fallen a bit to the wayside. Without going into some long essay-style rant on the state of media consumption and how trending YouTube videos play a larger than ever role in bringing spotlights to these games, I think it's a shame that some of the fuller horror experiences seem to have either been missed entirely or brushed aside far too soon. So, I thought I'd take some time to cover some of my favorites in a few long-form style videos. And the first one on my list is a fascinating horror game with some unique mechanics that was released back in 2020 called Maid of Sker. Maid of Sker is a survival horror game developed and released by Wales Interactive. Prior to Maid of Sker, the company had mostly released App Store games, VR games, and interestingly enough, FMV games well into the modern day. In fact, as recently as 2023, they've been releasing what they call interactive movies, in genres from murder mystery to rom-coms, which I think is really cool. But Maid of Sker was their first real foray into true survival horror, and from all contemporary accounts, it did extremely fine upon release. It was praised for its unique visuals, soundtrack, and story, but a lot of critics considered the gameplay to be a letdown. Still, it was received with an overall positive score most of the time, and Steam players seem to hold it in a high regard, with the game sitting at a very positive in both its recent and all-time scores. Despite this, Maid of Sker never really seems to come up in conversations about modern horror, and when it does, it's usually drowned out at the bottom of a Reddit page somewhere. So, why was Maid of Sker so quickly forgotten? And despite what my personal feelings for it may be, did it deserve to be? Well, let's find out. Maid of Sker opens with our silent protagonist Thomas reading a letter from his lover Elizabeth while riding a train through the Welsh countryside. She's in danger, as her father and uncle have imprisoned her in the family hotel on Sker Island and are forcing her to sing in order to gather guests. She hints at an impending darkness, but doesn't divulge much in the letter, fearing we would think that she's gone mad. She requests that Thomas create a countersong to the one included in a locket that belonged to her mother before he arrives. And from the sheet music nearby and the locket he's holding, it seems like he's done just that. After that brief cutscene, we get our title card. Immediately, I can see why the contemporary critics praise the music and the visuals. The music throughout the game is, spoilers, phenomenal, and I'll try to include as much of it as I can in this video without getting copyright claimed. It's so good, I downloaded the soundtrack to my MP3 player and listen to it while I write or draw sometimes. I've only ever done that with like 2 other games, so this is high praise from me. And the visuals are just as fun. It's very Bioshock, if that makes sense. Maid of Sker isn't ultra stylized like Detention or Inside, but it has little things that keep it from being the same boring, hyper-realistic style that I've become very tired of over the years. Like Bioshock, a lot of the models have a kind of smoothness to them, nothing is overly textured, and the lighting is more atmospheric than realistic. Just in this opening scene, we can see how the sun casts a lot of hard shadows and makes everything feel warm despite the ominous letter. I'll likely point out some other instances of the light later on, but I really found myself enjoying the look and feel of this game's world. As the train comes to a stop, we are given control of Thomas. The game's first person, and his movement options are pretty basic. Walk, run, crouch, crouch, walk. That's about it. Not a bad thing, but it could definitely be better, as we'll see later. Thomas exits the train to an abandoned station littered with debris, crates, and suitcases. Everything seems tattered and overgrown, like no one has taken care of the place in quite some time. It pricks at the something isn't quite right part of the brain in a way that's just subtle enough to work. There are signs celebrating the grand reopening of the Sker Hotel, but those look pretty worn out too. Thomas walks along a very unkempt pathway through the sun-dappled trees and eventually comes across a gate that is overgrown with vines and locked up tight. Luckily for Thomas, it appears that a fallen tree, or perhaps just negligence, has damaged a portion of the fence, and he's able to follow another pathway through the woods to a kind of side building that resembles a greenhouse or a solarium. The whole sequence, despite being bathed in warm light, is kind of unsettling. If the hotel is expecting a grand reopening, why does everything look terrible? Why is so much of the area overgrown? Has it been long enough from when Elizabeth sent out her letter that it reached this state, or was it like that before? The player is presented with a lot of questions right off the bat, and even though nothing actually scary has happened yet, the tone of the game has been well set. It's in this strange little building that we discover the first of many phonographs. These act twofold, as story delivery devices and save points. Anytime you interact with one, you can choose to save your game, but the first time you also receive a recording that helps to flesh out some aspects of the story. I'll go over most, if not all of these, when we really get down into the nitty-gritty of the story analysis, but for now we're simply greeted with a clip of Elizabeth interrupting her mother recording something, and then the latter singing a portion of a song. Exiting the solarium, we get a brief shot of a very green pond that has clearly been struck by some sort of algae bloom. Slowly introducing native plants around the border of the pond and reducing the nutrients available to the algae should help remedy that. But Thomas is here to save his lover, not follow my instructions on proper ecological water maintenance. So instead, he makes his way down a flight of stairs and through the woods again, passing under some rather rickety-looking wooden structures and coming across something floating over a body of water. It's like a yellow wisp, and before we can get too close, it flies away. Upon further inspection of the pond, it appears that there's a decent number of native plants around, so perhaps the issue is an overabundance of nutrients in the water or the soil, or something like that. Anyways, at the same time that Thomas encounters the wisp, he also comes across a barking dog that seems agitated by the weird ball of light. A normal response, I suppose. The dog runs away as quickly as the wisp does, and now Thomas is left behind a wooden gate. After wandering along the path a little while longer, Thomas arrives on the other side of the locked gate from before, and can proceed up to the main building. Unfortunately, another gate is waiting for him. The area is just as overgrown as before, but with more suitcases and an entire abandoned carriage just sitting outside. No horses, though. Luckily, this gate is much more easily circumvented, as a lever in an adjacent building allows Thomas to easily pop the gate open and slip inside. The hotel courtyard has another abandoned carriage, still no horses, and a large banner sign celebrating the hotel's grand reopening. Looks great. As Thomas approaches the hotel, though, a haunting melody plays out over the wind. The hotel's interior is an instant tonal shift. It's dark, it's dusty, it's covered in strewn suitcases and various items. Spooky. There are candles lit in a ritualistic manner around a portrait of a woman, and a phone booth rings out against the left wall. Side note, at first I thought these were kind of weird and out of place, but after doing some research, I discovered that these, called Victorian phone booths, were somewhat common in banks, drugstores, and hotels in the mid to late 1800s. So despite being kind of an odd way to move the story along, the phone booths are historically accurate. When we answer, we're greeted by Elizabeth.
Thomas! My Thomas! You do not know how wonderful it is to hear your voice. I do not have the words or heart to voice it. It is far too terrible to recount. Please be careful, my love. This place is no longer safe. I'm safe upstairs, but I cannot leave the attic. I've had to lock and bar the door, hide away from the others. I prayed that you received it, hoped that you would come. I know my request must have seemed strange, and I fear it was all for naught, that everything has changed now. My father and uncle, the staff, they have been beguiled by the darkness that inhabits this place. They are no longer themselves, but stalk these halls, attacking anyone that makes a sound. Please, Thomas, listen carefully. Together we can put a stop to all of this. My father made recordings on brass cylinders of a song, a strange melody that affects the mind. If all of the cylinders are played together on the harmonium, this madness will end. You need to find them and bring them to me.
After being given our mission by Elizabeth, we're released into the rest of the hotel to begin exploring. A bit of a note when it comes to the phone booth conversations. Don't worry about missing out on a dialogue choice because you select another one. You'll always be able to say every option, so there's no risk of missing out on any story or quest information. Okay. The foyer is destroyed. Blood is smeared on the walls and the floor. From the get-go, the only option is the east wing. The hallways are darker and more isolated than the foyer, and the wallpaper is torn and molding. Here, Thomas discovers the first of many green rooms. Set apart by their patterned green doors, these rooms act similar to the typewriter rooms in Resi games. Enemies can't enter them, and each room has a phonograph. Exiting the room back out into the hallway, we're stopped by a voice behind a door who identifies himself as Henry. The door has a kraken symbol on it. We'll come back to that.
Who's there? Who are you? Henry! Henry Hughes. You must get me out. Hurry! We must get this door open. Why do you think? They're clearly rogues. They're trying to kidnap me. Please, hurry. Do something. What? No! No, don't leave me! They might return any minute. Oh, do something! I can't break it down from my side. Good. Good. Try again. Harder, man! Throw yourself into it! Wait. No. They're coming. Oh, God, please, no! No, don't do this! Whatever you want,
The poor man has clearly been snatched, and so we continue on, completely missing the very available chapel somehow. I'll remember later and come back. Most of the doors are locked with the same kraken symbol on them, so instead I lead Thomas towards a service elevator. There's no power though, so we're forced to backtrack to a generator lever to activate it and restore the elevator function. Now, Thomas can ride the elevator down to the basement. Basements always suck in horror games. I don't mean like they're bad or poorly designed or anything, I mean they're guaranteed to throw something out at the player. And as we have yet to interact with an enemy, I'm kind of on edge. Sure enough, it's not long before we come face to bloody face with Henry, as the poor man is thrown through a window by a monstrously large Mr. X looking guy. We're helpless to stop the Mr. X lookalike from pulling Henry's unconscious body from the shattered window, tossing him over his shoulder like a bag of potatoes, and stomping away. We can't follow them directly, but by taking a few side hallways, we can make our way back around to the window where Henry was attacked, picking up some notes, a map, and a healing item along the way. I'll reveal the contents of this and most of the other letters later on in our story analysis. Once we get back to the window, we can follow a bloody trail back to what looks to be a distillery or maybe a storeroom. Whatever it is, it has another one of those phone booths in it, and we receive this call from Elizabeth.
I'm here. There was someone else in the attic outside the door, but I think they've gone now. I don't. But you must look to yourself first, Thomas. If you should be caught too... They seem to be drawn to sound. You must remain quiet. Dear God, that's horrific. I dread to think of you being snatched like that too. Our one hope of helping him, helping all of them, is finding the cylinders. But why? What do you think is wrong with them? I knew noise attracted them, but what happened to their faces? Please, take the utmost care. And if I don't answer, it means I've had to hide, that they've come back.
After our call with Elizabeth, we can continue our way through the basement in search of the cylinders. We're sent through a few more rooms, each one primed for an enemy to appear out of nowhere, but nothing. It's not until we make our way down a series of narrow tunnels within the basement walls and push past fallen pillars of wood that we're introduced to our first baddie, in a quite spectacular style as well. Here, we're introduced to Hold Our Breath, and this introduces another key gameplay mechanic. So let's pause for a moment and flesh this out. As Elizabeth has mentioned already, the enemies in this game, known as the Quiet Ones, are blind, and use their heightened hearing to track down Thomas and to that extent, the player. When you walk, run, or even breathe, you make noise. Usually, the Quiet Ones patrol regular routes at a pretty consistent pace, pausing occasionally to quote-unquote look around. Any noise you make near them will cause them to enter one of two different stages, depending on how loud you are. If you've made just a little noise, or quickly held your breath and crouched down after being noticed, the Quiet Ones will enter a sort of listening stage. Here, they stop moving and will scan the room, trying to detect where you are by any additional noise you make. If you continue to make noise by walking around, or are too close and don't hold your breath, they then enter the chase mode and attack phase. If you're too loud from the get-go, they skip straight to this phase. Once they are in the chase phase, the only way to return them to normal is to get as far away from them as possible, as quietly as possible. This is much easier said than done, but I'll talk more about this later. For now, all you need to know is that sound is a bad thing, and to avoid being attacked, the player needs to focus on stealth. Oftentimes, the player can avoid being attacked simply by having Thomas crouch walk around enemies and hold his breath when they're nearby. The Quiet Ones usually patrol by themselves, or if there are multiple, then they usually follow routes separate enough that good timing is all you need to slip past them. Okay, so, back to the game. After avoiding the Quiet One that bursts through the wall, we can continue exploring the basement. It's mainly crawling through a vent and arriving in a boiler, maybe incinerator room. Here, we can hear someone, presumably the monster man who has Henry, stomping around before leaving. Once he's gone though, Thomas can exit the vent and enter into the grander room. There's not much to see, but there is a music sheet I highly recommend grabbing, and a healing tonic, and I also highly recommend grabbing that. Afterwards, we can exit through the back door into the woods outside. Night has already fallen on Scare Island while we've been stumbling around the basement, and the woods that had looked so pretty and warm before are now hauntingly dark and foreboding. There's a phonograph right outside, and after saving, Thomas treks out into the woods. Crates and torchlight help mark a pathway, and soon Thomas comes across the first free-roaming enemy. It wanders around a campfire, and as long as you follow the tips I mentioned before, it's not hard to avoid him at all. As the first real enemy, it's a good way to introduce player to the mechanics of avoiding them. It feels very tense for a new player, but it isn't actually that dangerous. After dancing around with our first Quiet One, Thomas makes his way further into the woods, and comes across a graveyard. Okay, full truth here. I wandered around in this graveyard for ages, trying to figure out how to progress. I kept trying to open the crypts or something, and totally missed the one grave that was covered in candles and was clearly very important. In the background right now, you're probably watching sped-up footage of me wandering around in a grave for a while. Eventually, I do discover the grave, and after Thomas interacts with it, this scene plays out. After surviving what seems like it should have been death by jump scare, Thomas awakens in an underground catacomb-like network of tunnels. It's here that we discover a letter that seems to point towards cultist activity on the island, placed precariously on the top of a stone casket. We follow the cave path and once again come face to face with a wisp creature suspended in a cage. It vanishes quickly though as soon as Thomas gets close. The mausoleum catacomb section leads into what seems to be a mine of some sorts, or at least mine shafts, under the island, and it's here we get a bunch of lore drops in the form of notes and letters. I've mentioned it a few times already, but I'm going to mainly discuss the direct gameplay and story that we're getting into in this section. I'll break everything else down in a later section, so if it seems I skip over something or don't talk about a letter you see me grab, it's because I'm saving it for later. The mineshaft section has a great open area where Thomas has to avoid a few quiet ones all on their own path in order to activate different power switches needed to open a gate. The activation of each switch can make a small amount of noise, so it's important to make sure that there are no quiet ones nearby when you flip it. To assist in this, there's another switch in the middle of the room that can activate bells down 2 different mineshafts. The bells cause the quiet ones to bolt in that direction, freeing up Thomas to flip the switches without interruption. Combining puzzles with tense enemy encounters like this is one of the strengths of Maid of Sker, and it's one of the cool things you can do with its kind of sound-based enemies, despite its relative simplicity. It makes for a fun gameplay. Behind the gate is a short passage that leads to a very rickety elevator that drops Thomas off in an old church. There are scattered books and documents all over talking about the cult and how to initiate new members, but we won't have to wonder how that works much longer. Thomas rings 2 loud-ass bells to open the gate to the church and is released back out into the woods. A short walk leads him out into an open area cast in an eerie red light, and we can snoop to watch this horrific event unfold.
Please, I beg of you, no! I'll give you anything. You can have it all.
After witnessing the fate of who I can only assume is Henry, it is in Thomas's best interest to get out of Dodge. A short run through the red smoke leads Thomas to the hotel's vast gardens. The garden itself is a series of hedge mazes, broken statues, and quiet ones on patrol. It's a great area to introduce larger groups of enemies. As we step out into the open, someone throws a bottle that shatters into not just purple mist. These will pop up from time to time, and cause Thomas to begin coughing when he breathes it in. Coughing is another large aspect of Maid of Sker stealth. Air pollutants like the purple gas, heavy dust, and smoke can cause Thomas to cough loudly, attracting the quiet ones. This is easily circumvented by having Thomas hold his breath, but you can't have him hold it forever. If Thomas tries to hold his breath too long, the screen will begin to grayscale, indicating that he's losing oxygen. If you hold it even longer, he'll finally begin to sputter and cough, and you can't hold his breath until he's done doing so. If there are any quiet ones around when this happens, it's essentially a death sentence. However, it takes a long time to get to this stage, so much time in fact that I never naturally achieved this, and had to force Thomas to do it just to test it out. I don't even think I have any footage of it, so you'll have to take my word for it. Honestly, as important as coughing is, I always found it more of an annoyance than something that added tension. Once you recognize where and when to hold your breath, it just becomes another thing you do to pass through different areas. Despite the shortcomings I just mentioned, the garden sequence is pretty good. There are a good number of quiet ones here that are patrolling the maze, and each corner feels like it could have a quiet one on the other side. And despite the open sky, each lane feels cramped in the best way. There were several super close calls that I had here, where all I could do was hold my breath and crouch on the sidelines, hoping the quiet ones would just shuffle past. After escaping the maze, Thomas comes across another greenhouse/solarium, where another phone booth is waiting for him.
Thomas! Yes, I'm fine. But I feared the worst had happened. You were gone so long. I dreaded that you'd been taken too. My God. Dear Lord, have mercy. What are they trying to do? That poor wretched soul. You must be on your guard, Thomas. You can't let them catch you. Oh. That must be Calliope, my late mother's dog. I'd so hoped she was safe. I had good reason to suspect that my uncle had disposed of her. It is so good to hear your voice again.
After we finish the call, the aforementioned dog jumps at the door and runs off into the woods again. Now, Thomas can proceed up towards Scare Point, but before we get too close, we once again run into poor Calliope caught in a bear trap. There's a nice scene of Thomas petting the likely very frightened dog before releasing her from the bear trap, where she promptly runs off again. Now that Calliope is free, we can make our way up to the top of Sker Point and attempt to grab our first cylinder. This could also be your second cylinder, if you didn't completely miss the one in the chapel like I did. It seems, and I may be wrong here, that you can theoretically grab the cylinders in any order, as they aren't technically necessary to progress through the different areas, and by the end of the game, you'll have access to the entire property. There's clearly a recommended order you should be grabbing them in, but if you miss one, you aren't locked out of one of the game's endings. The cylinder of Sker Point is protected by a pretty good bell puzzle that requires you to ring them in a certain order. It was a good difficulty, not too easy, not too moon logic. After grabbing the cylinder, we can make our way back down the hill and towards the Sker Hotel. The path now has some quiet ones, but they aren't too tricky to avoid if you sneak around them on the edge. The room with the phone booth from before has another door, and if we send Thomas down that route, he'll come across a room that seems to be a lab of some kind. Among the chalkboards and diagrams, Thomas can acquire the only real weapon that he'll have access to in the entire game, the phonic modulator. This strange little orb is essentially a flashbang grenade specifically for the quiet ones. It doesn't kill them, but instead releases a melody that stuns them for a bit, long enough for Thomas to get away. It uses phonic modulator cartridges as ammunition, and there are only 10 set up around the map, all in fixed locations. There's actually an achievement tied to either using all or none of them, but unless you're an achievement hunter, you'll likely find yourself only using the modulator in a pinch. No sooner has the game given Thomas the weapon than he gets an excuse to test it out, as 2 quiet ones burst in. After acquiring the phonic modulator and using it to escape, Thomas is dropped into one of my favorite sequences into the game. There's a gate that needs multiple power switches to be flipped in order to operate, but the switches are scattered around a large open pavilion covered in fog and quiet ones. You'll need to sneak through undetected and flip each switch, watching the movement patterns of each quiet one carefully and avoiding gas traps that'll make you cough. The whole encounter is very tense, and the fog, tall grass, and dark environment really help keep the player on edge and add a sense of paranoia to every move. Was the shape you saw move out of the corner of your eye coming closer or moving away? Is it safe to pause and keep an eye on where you are, or are you in the path of a quiet one and just don't know it? It's not overly challenging, honestly, nothing in this game is if you've played even 1 or 2 survival horror games before, but it's a very good switch up from the solo encounters we've had so far. Once all the switches are flipped, Thomas can exit the area and finally return to the hotel. He enters through a back door we haven't seen before, and can grab a charge from the phonic modulator, and from there he arrives at what seems to be a theater room of some kind. When he enters, a spotlight lights up on the stage and reveals a scene of a giant tentacles attacking a ship. Our approach, though, is interrupted when a quiet one just throws himself through the window and decides to get in the way. But, like most of the quiet ones, he moves in a predictable pattern, and we can sneak around behind him to snatch the key on stage, the cracking key. I wonder where that goes. Key in hand, we can open up the theater door and make our way out through the trashed halls back to the main foyer of the hotel. However, in our absence, the area has been filled with quiet ones, and their grouping makes navigating a little trickier than before. By employing the tried and true crouch and try not to die method, Thomas enters the foyer and gradually makes his way to the phone booth near the entrance, which is ringing again. When we answer, we're able to speak with Elizabeth again.
Oh, Thomas, that's welcome news. This will surely free us all. I'm sorry, my love, but I do not. My father and uncle, my family, had many secrets, and so much has only now become clear. The other cylinders must be in the hotel. Perhaps on the 1st or the 2nd floors. Look for a way to reach me. Some means to come here to the attic.
With our mission now being to get to the next floor, Thomas leaves the booth and heads over to the previously locked rooms in the east wing. There we find a projector that seems to lay out the optimal spots to put the cylinders around the hotel, one of which shows Sker Point, the place where we already grabbed ours. It's actually from looking at this projector that I realized I skipped the chapel and decided to head back over there to grab the cylinder before I can move on. Fun fact, if you grab the cylinder earlier, before going to the basement, there's no quiet one in this room to contend with, and the sun is still streaming through these windows. Just kind of a neat little touch. Anyways, we can sneak around the quiet one in here and snag the cylinder without too much worry. Interestingly, there's also a statue at the back of the chapel that we seem to be able to interact with, but I don't have the necessary items right now, so I guess we'll come back. If we explore back behind the elevator that takes us to the basement, we can find another locked room, this one being a study with a beer tap on the desk. At first this seems kind of like a random object, but if we return to the foyer and go back to the west wing, following the path we took back from the theater, we can enter into the bar and reception area. Here, we can reinstall the beer tap and find a board on the wall with various buttons that correspond to different bells at locations on the ground floor. By pressing the buttons, we can guide the quiet ones in that direction, and out of our way. Pretty neat. With the beer tap installed, we have everything we need to access the next floor. Each tap can be put down in a sequence. We just need to find the right one. Luckily, there's no need to wander around for the answer. If you look directly across the room, you'll see a series of paintings. The paintings all have a corresponding beer tap, and by flicking them down in the right order, Thomas reveals a secret ladder that leads upstairs. Unfortunately, the ladder being revealed is super loud, and a whole gaggle of quiet ones begin to circle around our recently revealed ticket upstairs. This is where the buttons on the wall come in. What is supposed to happen is that Thomas uses the buttons to distract the quiet ones long enough to make it to the ladder. I somehow managed to activate them poorly enough that one of the quiet ones rushed into the room I was trying to leave through and immediately began kicking my ass. I should have activated the phonic modulator at this point, but instead I panicked and just booked it towards the ladder as fast as I could while getting wailed on. Luckily for me, the quiet ones can't enter the ladder area, so that's some less than optimal gameplay on my part. Now thoroughly beat up, Thomas arrives on the first floor. So this game is set in Wales, and as such, they refer to the first floor as the ground floor, and the second floor as the first floor, and so on and so forth. I'll try not to hold it against them. Since the game calls it that, I will too. So, on the first floor, we exit out of essentially a broom closet to the familiar dulcet tones of another phone booth ringing. Of course, we rush to answer.
Yes, I'm still here. Oh, hopefully you'll be able to find a way up to me now. But please be wary on the first floor. I know that my father and uncle devised all manner of dangers. Watch your step. I've not heard anything outside this door for a good while now. But I can still hear them, searching around the other rooms. It's mainly guest rooms on that floor. The library too, and my father's snug. I'm not sure. Perhaps the library. Take care, my Thomas.
With now a general idea of what we're looking for, the library, we begin to search around the floor. The first and most noticeable thing on this floor is the big model of the hotel that sits in the middle of the room. Attached to the model are 4 crests, it seems, all of which are broken and missing a piece. I would make a guess that we probably need to find those pieces. Without, maybe a harpsichord key? The unlocked double doors on the left are really the only option, and so Thomas begins his exploration. It's made clear very quickly that this hotel wasn't exactly a 5-star experience before the monsters arrived either. Numerous rooms are booby-trapped, and I jumped out of my skin the first time these bed spikes went off. Not exactly what I'd call a good night's rest. The first floor is locked down rather tight, so instead of the normal route between rooms, Thomas uses a series of vents accessible through a valve system to sneak around, and he also takes the valve wheel with him while he's at it. We can use this valve at a different area on the first floor to access a passage behind a wall that lets us gain access to a room bathed in spooky red light. A new looking quiet one, maybe Henry, but I'm not sure, slams on the glass, and after we flip the switch, we set the guy free in the process. Now with that room open, we can sneak inside and grab the first crest fragment. Down the hallway is another room with a key, and it's just right there on a pillow for the taking, in a closet, as long as you avoid the quiet one. Yeah, I didn't know he could go into the closet, and promptly got my ass handed to me in a fight, so don't do that.
Oh!
Now, with the crest fragment and 1 key, we can return to the large room with the model and install the fragment there. Once we do that, the phone booth starts to ring again, and Elizabeth has even more info to share with us.
I know. my shame. The truth cuts me to the core. Had I known that my father and uncle had created such vile tortures, such ways to murder... There is an elevator. More of my father's tinkering and engineering. But he made a complex lock, which requires 4 parts of our family crest to open. Wait, someone's coming. Thomas, you have to hurry for both our sakes.
We have the music key now, so we can enter the other side of the floor. I have Thomas immediately enter one of the rooms, and when we explore the bathroom, we come face to face with another fragment, suspended in the air, with a rope, looking a lot like a trap. So, obviously, I make Thomas grab it without worry. The floor gives way, and Thomas plummets into a room partially filled with water. An observant player would see that the walls were closing in right away and begin trying to escape. I am not that kind of player. I'm crushed without making much progress besides running in circles. On attempt number 2, I realize that the hatches on the wall are holding a wheel needed to open the door. I do find the wheel, but I'm too late and crushed again. Okay, 3rd time's the charm. I'm lucky enough to grab the wheel quickly and unlock the door to escape. Nice. 2nd crest shard acquired. But my luck doesn't seem to be improving because the next room I eventually checked has a jack-in-the-box on a table that gasses Thomas as soon as he interacts with it. Just not a fun floor for Thomas, honestly. Thomas awakens from the gas in a room illuminated only by a spotlight above a table. Otherwise, the room is completely dark. Entering this darkness in an incorrect way gets you attacked by what seems to be like evil birds or something, so don't do that. I was totally caught off guard by this part and had zero idea what I was supposed to be doing. So I wandered into the darkness and got attacked by evil shadow birds for a while before I finally caved and looked up what I was supposed to be doing. I usually hate doing this, but sometimes you gotta do what you gotta do. Especially when this is the alternative. Okay, so the trick to getting out of here is to listen for the sounds in the darkness and try to head towards it. If you follow the sounds properly, you don't get beat up by birds and instead arrive at another vignette. From there, another sound will play, and you continue the process. Each little vignette gives you a bit of additional lore, though it's not super clear, it's more kind of ideas of lore. After we complete all of the vignettes, Thomas escapes the Shadow Realm with a piece of sheet music, our 3rd one so far, counting the one we came in with. After this endeavor, poor Thomas is battered and beaten within an inch of his life. Oops. Unfortunately, I don't have any healing items, and I'm having a very hard time finding any. My health is so low that I'm essentially 1 hit away from death. This leads me to another gameplay mechanic that is a bit hit or miss in my opinion. Like a lot of survival horror games, Maid of Sker doesn't have a traditional health bar or anything. Instead, it uses damage stages to convey to the player how much damage Thomas has taken. As you take damage, you move through more stages until you die, and each stage and every hit causes Thomas to make more noise as he moves. This is a cool concept. It's an additional penalty for taking damage, and it fits in well with the sound and noise emphasis that the game has. Unfortunately, this doesn't work as well as it should in practice. That is because of the scarcity of healing items within the game. At this point in the game, I hadn't come across a healing item since, I think probably the basement, and it wasn't for lack of looking. Now I'm ready to admit fully that maybe I just missed the tonics as I was playing, and I would like to think of myself as a pretty decent survival horror game fan and player, but I'm not infallible. I'm used to rare healing items and limited resources, but I had the hardest time getting any healing in this game. Together, these elements lead to kind of a death spiral. Once you take a few hits, you start being louder, which makes it easier for the quiet ones to hear you, and in turn, it makes them attack you more often, damaging you more, and making you louder, and so on and so forth. I'll include a comparison of Thomas on full health and Thomas very damaged, just so you can hear for yourself the difference. So, what started as a really neat health mechanic can quickly break down into an annoyance. Now even with this hiccup, the game isn't made impossible. It's not trying to softlock you or make completing the game an incredible uphill battle. Honestly, it's just kind of more annoying than anything. I don't want to bash it too heavily because it's not like an unforgivable gaming sin, but it was one of the only issues that I had with the game, so I wanted to give some room here to talk about it, especially because I've been making poor Thomas wander around the hotel utterly destroyed for the last however long, and I thought now would be a good time to talk about it. After accepting my place at the bottom of the food chain, I forced poor Thomas to hobble across the first floor, trying to find the library. In an offshoot room, me and Thomas discover a bathtub that suddenly bursts into flames when I enter the room, which, logically speaking, confuses me. But it's still a neat addition to the floor as one of the traps. I search around for a bit, hoping that the bathroom has some kind of healing items, but no luck. We do find a map though, and I finally figure out where the library is. Luckily, there aren't any quiet ones in between the room Thomas is in and the library, so I can shuffle down the hall and into the library no problem. The first thing I see in the library is a quiet one, and I think, fantastic. I'm gonna have to be extra careful. But the second thing I see, around the corner, is my holy grail. After accepting this wonderful gift from the heavens and retracting all the terrible things I mumbled under my breath at the game while wandering the first floor, I examined the rest of the library. There are a handful of quiet ones marching around, and with the close quarters, it's much easier for them to bump into you if you aren't careful. Additionally, it seems that Elizabeth's info isn't quite right. The glass case in the middle of the library doesn't have a cylinder, but a crest fragment instead. That's fine, it's still something we need. It seems that the case is sealed with the same kind of electronic locks we've been dealing with the whole game, and the switches for it are up on the library's second floor. There are 2 switches up there, but we can only activate one at a time. We have to run downstairs and press the button on the lock between flipping the 2 switches. Once we're done, Thomas can snatch the fragment and be on his way. With 3 of the 4 crest fragments in hand, I'm a bit lost on where to go next. I wander on the first floor until I come back across a bell and boat puzzle that I'd seen earlier but couldn't figure out. You see, when I'd first stumbled across this puzzle, I thought the very loud bell sounds were a kind of trap, and I'd bolted from there as soon as it started making noise. Wrong decision. What you're supposed to do is activate the model ship so that it makes a chime. Then you need to ring the bells on the adjacent wall in the same pattern. Once you do this, the boat opens and Thomas can grab the last shard. I felt a bit foolish, but to my own credit, it seems like the bells can actually attract a quiet one if it's nearby, so be on guard while doing this puzzle. Now, with all 4 of the fragments in hand, we can head back to the room we'd entered at the very beginning and slot all the fragments into the crests around the hotel. As soon as you do this, the metal gates that block you from the elevator to the second floor, third floor for Americans, swing open super loud and all of the quiet ones on the floor bolt to your location. I send Thomas running towards the elevator as quickly as I can, and lucky for me, the quiet ones cannot follow us onto it. The floors continue to be more cramped and unsettling the higher we go. The second floor elevator opens into a row of candles eerily lit to form a pathway. It seems empty so far. To the left is another phone booth, and it seems like Elizabeth is calling us again.
Thomas? Thomas? My Uncle Abraham might be on the second floor now. No, but I heard somebody crashing around a few moments ago from somewhere below me. My uncle was not a man to be trifled with before, and now I am not sure he's a man at all. He's a brute, Thomas. I pray you be careful. There is a way up to the attic, through my father's rooms in the west wing. You should be able to reach me that way. Please take care, Thomas.
Okay, so keep an eye out for the uncle and find Elizabeth. Cool, we can do that. There's not much to say about this floor right now. It's empty and quiet in a way that really makes you wonder when that's going to end. I like that. It somehow builds up the tension more than trying to avoid groups of quiet ones. I kept wondering when the other shoe would drop, and it never really did. Everything stays quiet until I come across a key on a nicely illuminated pedestal. Okay, so that's probably also a trap. But we need the key, so to hell with it. Okay, so that's probably the uncle. Nice. It seems like shit's finally getting real. With Thomas's only hope of proceeding and making his way to Elizabeth now in the hands of what appears to be a very different enemy, we need to track him down. Unfortunately for us, he finds us first. After approaching a certain wall, Elizabeth's uncle bursts out like the Kool-Aid Man, oh look, it's the guy from before, in the basement, and begins bolting for me. Spoiler alert, he can hear much better than the regular quiet ones, to the point where he can essentially just see you. He's a Mr. Etz from Resi 2 kind of character. He immediately murders me while I attempt to hide. Okay, new strategy. We send Thomas back to grab the key again, and this time we pick up an additional cartridge for the phonic modulator. We then save the game here, so I don't have to do all this stuff again if I get stopped. This time, I attempt to use the phonic modulator, but somehow glitch it so that it doesn't work. To be clear, the phonic modulator does stun him for a very brief period of time, but for some reason here, it did not work. That's fine. Me and Thomas are a couple of crafty SOBs, so I use a small vent to juke her uncle and book it back towards the hole he punched through the wall. This lets Thomas access a previously locked off part of the floor, and into a nice little open courtyard looking place, with 2 levers that ring bells. By pulling them, we open more gates that allow Thomas to get through to more areas. We find another save room with a lot of lore information that I'll bring up later. For now, we can also gain access to a ballroom looking space with a huge electrical doohickey strapped to the ceiling. That's probably useful. Before I can fully understand how the machine works though, Elizabeth's uncle arrives and chases me out. I carefully dart around him to get back in and figure out how to activate the machine, but get killed pretty much instantly after this. Okay, we know what to do. We have a plan. Step 1. Lure the uncle into the room. This part is easy. He follows you wherever you go on the floor. Step 2. Stun him with the phonic modulator as close to the middle or entrance as you can. A little trickier, but not impossible. Step 3 is where it gets a bit more difficult. We need to activate the machine while the uncle is in the room. The reason why this is a bit tricky is because the machine has a bit of a charge-up period before it goes off. So it takes a few tries and panicky loops to get it right, but eventually with the help of random luck, we zap the uncle and can take the key right off him. As we do so, we receive another call from Elizabeth.
Yes, I'm still here. I thought you were... Something just... What was that? What happened? I could hear the sound of... Wait. I thought I heard something here. Somebody is trying the door, Thomas. I must go. No! No, stop! Stop! Let go of me! Let me go! You get off!
With the key now back in our possession, Thomas can head over to the previously locked off area. On the way, it quickly becomes clear that the floor has become repopulated with quiet ones, and after a while, it seems like Elizabeth's uncle is back in action too. Nice. Luckily, it's not too hard to sneak around to the locked rooms and discover that it's Elizabeth's father's room. In it, the 3rd cylinder, and the staircase up to the attic. More lore drop letters are in the room, but for now, we're going to head up to the attic and save Elizabeth. It seems empty, but we can see some paintings, 2 on the wall and 3 scattered around the room, and a piano. The keys we can press on the piano correspond to the different paintings. Once we figure out the order and play the keys, Thomas reveals a secret door, and we can finally get to Elizabeth. The attic space is kind of unnerving. It seems like there's someone hanging from the ceiling, some of the quiet ones' wooden effigies are scattered around, and we can find the device that Elizabeth has been using to call us in all the different phone booths. There are some wall scrawlings too, but none of that matters, because we can see Elizabeth's silhouette behind a cracked open door. We rush to meet her, and then this happens.
Oh.
After being thrown down a garbage chute into the basement, we wake up next to a completely ruined phonic modulator. Great. I wasn't using it too much anyways. It seems we're back in the basement, a part of the basement we've never been in before. The basement includes another save point, and then Thomas is sent down a corridor filled with hanging bodies. Ew. The rooms that line the hall seem to be holding cells where Elizabeth's father ran his experiments. Speak of the devil, Elizabeth's father randomly teleports and just kind of to intimidate Thomas before vanishing. I don't know why he can teleport. In the next room, we can find the final cylinder, and Thomas can grab it before returning back to the basement areas we explored towards the beginning of the game. I kind of got lost here for a second, and for some reason I just wandered around for way too long. The elevator that leads to the ground floor is out of order, so don't go that way. Instead, Thomas has to head towards the woods. But before we can escape, Elizabeth's dad beats us down with the cane, and we black out again. This time, Thomas wakes up tied to a chair in a pretty familiar spot, the ritual site where we watched Henry be transformed. Awesome. Rather than explain what happens, I'll let the sequence play out in full. Being kind to dogs always pays off. With Calliope's help, we're able to escape and sneak through the gauntlet of smoke, fire, and quiet ones. With all the smoke, it can be a bit tricky to sneak around the quiet ones here, but with some careful maneuvering, we can slip past them into a cave and return to the hotel. Thomas climbs up a ladder to a room on the ground floor that we haven't been in before. There are power boxes set up around a large room, all wired to a dome in the center. The dome is covered in wood and like a metal cage or something, and it doesn't seem like we can actually interact with it yet. Thomas can only move on to the next room, where a grand piano and control panel for the dome are set up. There's also a save room nearby, and after saving and returning to the piano room, a strike of lightning reveals Elizabeth's father playing as electricity courses from the dome to the different levers. Elizabeth comes over the intercom and informs us we can only move while her father is playing the piano. We need to run into the other room and flip the necessary switches before returning to the control panel to try and unlock the dome. It takes a few tries, and as long as you don't move while Elizabeth's father stalks around the room, it isn't too hard to complete the puzzle and unlock the dome. Once inside, we can use Elizabeth's locket to power off the device and depower her father long enough to take his key and escape. Alright, now all that's left is to approach the stairs in the foyer and talk to Elizabeth. But then I remember, that weird statue in the chapel. We never figured out what that was for. So I run back, and sure enough, the key that Thomas took off Elizabeth's father's body unlocks the statue and allows us to enter the hidden room. There we can find a quiet one strapped to a chair and one final piece of sheet music. Now, with all of the items gathered, we can approach Elizabeth on the stairs and finish the game. Okay, here is where I'm going to make my first big spoiler warning. We're going to pause and break down exactly what is happening. I've been showing you my gameplay and the events that occurred during the game itself, but to truly understand this story, we're going to need to read some notes, listen to some phonographs, and do a bit of thinking. So, if you have any interest in the game at all, and don't want to know the deeper story or how it ends, leave now and grab the game for yourself. If not, then stick around as I break down what exactly is going on using the clues we've gathered throughout the game. Okay, so what's actually happened at the Sker Hotel? Let's rewind a bit. Back when we entered that cave area earlier, I picked up a few documents that explain how Elizabeth's family, the Williams, made their fortune. Back in the day, a ship, the HMS Providence, washed up on the shore of the Sker Island. Elizabeth's father, Isaac Williams, discovered the wreckage, and his father and their men salvaged what they could from it and hid it in the caverns below Sker Point. But, among the wreckage, they discovered a creature. It's weak, and Isaac describes it as tragic, but it sings a song that seems to entrance some of the men and the workers. Isaac theorizes that the creature uses the song to lure in its prey so that it can devour them. However, in its weakened state, Isaac and its father believe that they can use the creature for their own gain. Isaac's father chains the beast up under the lighthouse on Sker Point, using its song to lure in ships in order to pillage the wreckage. While this seems to be enough for his father, Isaac believes that there's more that he can harness from the beast, and believes he can accomplish it with the help of his wife Prudence. We learn from various phonographs that Prudence was an expert singer, and she explains in a letter to Elizabeth that Isaac and his father promised her riches and power if she lent them her voice. Using the creature's song, Prudence lured guests to the Sker Hotel, where Isaac, his brother Abraham, and their father would use traps to kill them and steal their belongings. Soon, a sort of family cult sprung up around them known as the Quiet Ones, and Prudence became a sort of priestess figurehead. Much of the hotel staff was made up of these cult members, as explained in the letter we found in the catacombs. For a while, this worked well, and despite the fact that no one seemed to return from the hotel, the allure of Prudence's song, the song from the creature, kept the wealthy guests flowing. That is, until she died. The phonographs and various letters and dialogue in the game seem to point to it being an illness of some kind, but no matter how it occurred, her passing meant that the cash cow that was the Sker Hotel passed with her. But Isaac had a backup plan. Their daughter, Elizabeth, had inherited her mother's singing skills, and had been groomed from a young age to inherit the position her mother left vacant. Upon her mother's death, Isaac and Abraham began forcing her to practice the creature song for days on end. However, due to a letter from her mother that was written on her deathbed, and Elizabeth's own suspicions, she soon discovers the truth behind the song and attempts to foil her father and uncle's plans by creating a counter song that would free everyone under the song's spell. Around the same time, Isaac began experimenting with methods to better harness the song, most important to us, splitting the sound into 4 transportable cylinders that he could use to complete the ritual without Elizabeth. However, both of their plans would not bear useful fruit. Phonograph recordings and a letter tell us that Elizabeth found herself unable to write the counter song herself, perhaps due to her being too familiar with the song or being groomed from a young age, and so instead she contracted the writing out to 4 other songwriters, 2 of which being Thomas and Henry. This is the sheet music that we are requested to bring with us at the beginning of the game, and the sheet music that we've been discovering as we explore the hotel. Similarly, Isaac's cylinders did not produce the effect he desired, instead turning those affected with it into mindless monsters. All of this comes to a head shortly before we arrive at the hotel, where a letter reveals that when Isaac attempts to use Elizabeth to complete the ritual and restore glory to the Sker Hotel, a mismatch between her attempt to sing the counter song and the cylinders being used cause everyone at the hotel to transform into the quiet ones, like the enemy, not the cult. However, we find out this process is purely psychological. The song captivates them and turns them into mindless puppets, but then the song instructs them to burn off their faces to heighten their hearing. The masks aren't a result of any kind of transformation, but are self-inflicted to make them deadlier hunters. Crazy. This is right around the time that we, as Thomas, arrive, as well as the rest of the songwriters, though they definitely seem to have made it here before us. It seems that most of them were killed after being captured, and we know that Henry was because we saw it happen. Upon our arrival, Elizabeth requests that we bring her the cylinders, but by listening to the recordings and reading her diary entries scattered around, and especially the scrawlings on the wall in the attic, which I'll show you right here, it becomes clear this is a trap. Elizabeth, despite resisting it for much longer than the rest, has fallen under the sway of the song and now seeks to use it for herself. It appears she's not, fully under its control, as she's able to kind of plan out a way to harness the song's power for her own, nefarious purposes, but it's clear that she's definitely not the Elizabeth who made the plan to stop the song. We can see evidence of this in the attic, on a few recordings, and in some discrepancies in what the current Elizabeth says on the phone, and what past Elizabeth said in notes and phonograph recordings. So, instead of bringing her the cylinders, we need to follow her original plan, and deliver the 4 music sheets she asked for to complete the counter song if we want to achieve the good ending. So, there are 2 different ways the end can play out. Firstly, if you don't heed the numerous warnings left around the hotel, and instead give her the cylinders by choosing Trust Her, this sequence begins.
I had to flee the attic. I've been hiding from them ever since. But we must hurry. Do you have the cylinders? Then we cannot waste any time. Quickly, give them to me. Thank you, Thomas. There will be a place for you.
And here it is revealed what the creature is, but if you've been paying attention to some of the notes that have been scattered around and the general motifs of the game, you can probably guess what it is. There are tons of hints and documents all over the place. We've been seeing the creature in its ethereal form, the song and the ball of light, the creature calling out all throughout the game. But now, descending into the caverns underneath Scare Point, we see it, a siren, caged and held hostage, used to fund an evil legacy. Now fully in control of the song and with no further need for the siren, Elizabeth orders it killed, and we can only watch in horror as it's slaughtered.
Kill it for me.
From death and discord came new order, through the iron will necessary to impose it. A new song was born from the darkness, and together they ruled the new dawn.
But this need not be the creature's fate. If you have collected all the pages and if you've paid attention to all the clues, you can choose not to trust her and use the sheet music to activate the pipe organ and cause the countersong to play out. This seems to free everyone under its control, and Elizabeth helps us downstairs into the cavern to free the creature instead of killing it.
We shall end all this madness and disharmony and gain control of the siren's song for ourselves. Bring order to them. What are you doing?
No! Thomas, you don't understand. We must... Thomas? What am I doing? The countersong, yes. We need to end this. End all this misery and suffering. To free this thing and my family from this curse. In the light, new harmony was found. Old chains were broken, and in the aftermath of the song's end, a new one began.
And that brings us to the end of the game. Overall, I had a great time playing Maid of Sker, and it's going to sound like an insult, but I promise it's not. Maid of Sker really captures the feeling of those wacky and weird horror movies that were all over the place in the early to mid-2000s. Movies like 13 Ghosts, The Others, The Strangers, The Village, a lot of the titles, all have an overly grim, overly dark aesthetic that plays it fast and loose with the supernatural. I think of the ridiculous movie Dead Silence, where the reveal is that the old man has been hollowed out and is a puppet. That era of horror was right in between the slasher and creature feature craze of the 80s and 90s and the metaphorical ghost era of the late 2010s through today. It was experimental, it was weird, and it was executed suboptimally. That's Maid of Sker. Though the game isn't perfect by any means, it's still a great experience for horror fans. The story is rather by the books, but the notes and messages left throughout the game do a good job of not only foreshadowing the ending, but also creating a believable world. There are some elements, like how bizarre and strange it is to have so many odd passages and secret rooms in a hotel, that make a lot of sense when you consider that the whole point of the hotel was to be a harvesting ground for murder victims. A lot of potential plot holes are smoothed over very naturally by elements of the story that are only revealed towards the end. The gameplay elements, even if they are a bit clunky, are unique and definitely have moments where they shine, like the garden section in the library. I've already voiced a lot of my critiques earlier in the video, but if I had to make any suggestions, it would be to change up the number and strength of each enemy. If you're going to have unkillable enemies anyways, I would shrink down the number and make them all named or something and buff their abilities. For instance, maybe there are only 3 or 4 members of the garden staff, but they can emerge from the bushes and they carry around shovels, dealing more damage. Each enemy would feel like a challenge to overcome rather than just an obstacle. I really think that enemy variety is the most disappointing aspect of the game, especially because Wales Interactive did design different enemy types. Allow me to introduce you to the challenges. The challenges are stages of varying difficulty where we're tasked with escaping the hotel with a variety of weapons. We're given an axe, a shotgun, a rifle, and a pistol to tear your way through a gaggle of quiet ones. To mix things up and stop it from being too easy, the game includes a few different enemy types. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to borrow some footage here because OBS decided to not save the capture that I took, but I'm going to try to keep it brief. The game introduces 4 additional enemy types: the Banshee, the Mariner, the Blaze Slinger, and the Phantom. Each one has unique attacks and abilities, and all of them have more health than the usual quiet ones. The Banshee has a traditionally feminine build, can teleport around each time she's hit, and can use a scream attack to stun the player for a moment. The Mariner wears a diving helmet and can shoot out a damaging laser from the front. The helmet also seems to nullify all damage to the head, so no headshots with this guy. The Blaze Slinger is slow, glows red, and fires a blast of fire in a direct line of sight after taunting. It also explodes when killed. Finally, the Phantom wears a glowing blue device on its chest and can cloak itself. When it takes enough damage, it can create a copy of itself that has the same amount of health left. You'll also fight regular quiet ones that act the same as in the base game, and Abraham Williams. Abraham looks the same as in the game, but has a plethora of attacks at his disposal. Abraham can pull the player close with a chain and then use an AoE attack to damage them. He can also drop bear traps around and that stun the player momentarily and deal damage. Every now and then, he summons a couple basic quiet ones to attack the field as well. These enemies appear in all the challenge stages, but the health and damage they deal varies. All in all, this mode felt kind of bittersweet to play. The unique enemies are really cool, and the gameplay with the guns felt decent if a bit clunky. There was clearly some passion put behind these designs, and a part of me wishes they had been in the base game. But without weapons, it probably would have been unfair to deal with them. I don't know, I'm kind of torn. I would definitely say that if you enjoy the base game, these challenges are something to try out. Apparently, these enemy designs and a lot more show up in the spin-off shooter Scare Ritual. A blending of this game and the base game could have been the perfect middle ground, but I'm also not a game developer, so what do I know? Despite all of my complaints, I still highly recommend this game to any horror fans out there. Just know that you're not getting a AAA horror experience. You're getting a solid B-grade horror game that is competent and creative. However, the most frustrating part of this experience is that it's so close to being a perfect one. It's a great game on its own, but every aspect is just shy of hitting that perfect mark. It's like having a great 5-course meal, but no single course is done perfectly. Maybe the steak is slightly overdone, and the salad doesn't have quite enough dressing, and the chef ran out of sherries for your sundae. The meal is still good though, like it's delicious, it's not there. That's Maid of Sker. Check it out on Steam through the link in the description if you're interested. And if you enjoyed the video, leaving a like and subscribing to the channel means you'll see when I post another one, eventually. If you have a horror game you'd like me to cover, leave it in a comment below, and I will see you all next time.